everybody. Please welcome Navin from Mayfield. Um, well, all of them are legends in the investment world. And I know that a lot of the people here in the audience are either entrepreneurs or are to be entrepreneurs. And I think that a lot of you may be asking some of the questions that we may be asking ourselves. Some of you have asked me questions in some of the meetups that I don't really know how to answer because I'm not an investor. But the reality is that there's a lot happening right now in AI. And if you are working on your startup or you're going to be working on your startup, I hope that you actually enjoy the following set of questions. So I'm actually going to let you guys introduce yourselves, and then we start with questions. Yep.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kanu Gulati. I'm a partner at Khosla Ventures. This is a multi-stage fund, but our sweet spot is coming in at seed and Series A. My background is in technology, master's, PhD in EE, and I focus on AI applications, but also hardware, developer tools. Yeah, very excited to be here.
Hey, everyone. Miles Grimshaw with Benchmark Capital, early stage focused firm here in the Bay, primarily seed and Series A. Fortunate to be partnered with Minds and Jorge, and personally partnered with LangChain, which maybe some of you have been building with or playing with. I guess we're also partners with Cerebras, DeepL, and a few others that maybe are around AI, but we're all generalists, whether that be consumer or infrastructure software applications. Thanks for having us.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joanne Chen. I am a partner of Foundation Capital. We mostly invest at the very, very early stage, seed and Series A, primarily seed. And one of our biggest aspirations is to help companies go from no revenues to the first few millions of ARR. In terms of where we spend time, applied AI is where I've been investing for the last decade or so. Some of our companies in this space, we led the seed in Jasper. We are investors in Cerebras with Benchmark. We have companies like AnyScale, which is helping OpenAI with compute, and 34 other companies that have gone public. So super excited to be here, and looking forward to chatting with everybody.
Great. I'm Navin, Chaddha, Managing Director at Mayfield Fund, primarily focused on early stage investing, seed and Series A. We are generalists. We invest up and down the stack in the enterprise and other areas too. In enterprise, we invest all the way from semiconductors to infrastructure to data to middleware and tools and enterprise applications. And the aim is, as Joanne mentioned, how do we help companies right at the idea or inception stage, but help them go. We invest in every round to become iconic companies. The firm has been around since 1969. In our history, we have funded over 550 companies, 120 have had IPOs, and another 225 have been acquired. So I've been very lucky to have partnered with some of the people and glad to be investing in MindsDB and joining Benchmark. We just announced it today.
Thank you, Navin. Well, so I'm going to start with the questions. And these questions actually came from people in the community and in some of the meetups that we've had. And maybe at the end, if we have time, we'll do one question. I know you guys are super busy, so I don't want to keep you here for too long. But the first question that I've been asked a few times, and again, since I'm not an investor, I don't know very well how to answer this one, but what is your advice for an inception stage founder building an AI native company?
I can get started. So the way we think about AI on the applications, infrastructure, all the way to hardware, you have to understand or be very crystal clear on what is it that you are trying to really beat out of the park. So is it automating a job entirely, or are you automating a workflow? And then deeply thinking about where is the moat going to come from. The moat can come from thinking deeply about the integrations and reasoning on different data. It can come from building the most reliable solution. It can come from how the data flywheel works. It can be any combination of this. But being very crystal clear on how that will morph, given the underlying ecosystem is changing so rapidly, becomes even more important. Those are some of the things we think about as we are evaluating companies on year one, year two, what would be the continued differentiation, advantage, moat that can be built? So really, we think that the moat comes from thinking about AI deeply and not just adding it as a feature to an existing product. Because yes, the world is moving very quickly and a lot of people are adopting these technologies, so your product has to be more differentiated.
I think one of the things that probably everyone's been surprised by, all investors I imagine, and anyone else, is how fast incumbents have moved. And if you watch the Microsoft Build event a week ago or so, just the pace of announcements and integration of AI capabilities is staggering. And I think you see that across the board. And so when we're meeting teams and thinking about this, unlike maybe when the internet emerged and you could be there and you were first there and it was a new distribution channel, this isn't a new distribution channel. It's very much an enabling technology. And I think to attack, to try and win share and have a sustainable and interesting advantage, one has to sort of be disruptive in some other way. And I'm particularly interested in teams that are maybe trying to create a innovator's dilemma, a conflict with any incumbent's business model. And so you've seen everyone launch co-pilots. I'd challenge many startups to try and ponder, and I don't know the answer to it, but where actually could you be getting rid of seats? Many of these businesses, their entire business model is built on seats. How could you actually do more there? How could you be, Salesforce comes out and does CRM in the cloud, and it's a very different value proposition. It was you could rent software versus you had to buy software, and it's a very disruptive business model to Siebel. Spotify comes out, you can lease songs versus have to buy every song. It's a very disruptive business model to Apple at the time. And so I think I'd provoke that thought to many teams we work with. And potentially, although it's a lot harder, where could a product experience kind of just be radically different? And I don't know, one idea I think about there as a story is maybe, Tinder and dating. Like mobile opened up a lot more time for people to have a very different dating experience to Match, which asked you tons of questions and, tried to get the very best recommendation. It allowed for a form factor that was a very different experience. Google came about and wasn't a portal in the same way. It allowed you to unlock search with a different technology. And so I think it's worth provoking not just how can I take the technology, but what could I do that is very structurally different to anyone that's out there already, because I wouldn't underappreciate the pace at which and the potential for existing leaders to add this in.
Well, first of all, you should come talk to one of us if you're thinking about building in this space. And I think the second and probably the most important thing is, regardless whether you're an AI company or not an AI company, what you're selling has to be valuable to enough people, right? Like at the end of the day, the customer is the most important ingredient in this. But I'll answer the question in the context of what makes this era maybe different, or what advantages could you have as a company. One, I think, is in some industries where there is little AI innovation, you can probably stand out, right? One, very clear example is, Jasper started 2 years ago. There were 2 or 3 competitors. Jasper out-executed, I would say, all of them, growing from nothing to almost 100 million revenues. But the landscape of competition was very, very light. Today, you could still find opportunities like this in less loved industries, like logistics, procurement, and some other stuff that a lot of entrepreneurs may not have the personal experience to build there. So that's like one arbitrage in terms of like which landscape and which buyer you want to build for. I think the second is to rethink business models. So for example, I love to use the example of like, hey, if Atrium was started, Atrium is a legal tech company, so reinventing a legal firm, started today, I think it might be more successful, because today you can imagine building a law firm with just 20 people and $1 billion in revenues because of the underlying technology, what's enabling, right? And then you can get rid of billable hours. You could think about repackaging the service in a very different way. And that's a whole business model innovation. And I think the third, which we're very excited about, and I think fewer people are investing there, is all the opportunities around security. There's a lot of behaviors around model poisoning or data poisoning and fake news, which is going to be a massive problem. And I think that sector has lagged in general in terms of innovation compared to everything else. And if you're building that space, please come talk to us.
Great. I think a lot has been said about AI. So rather than being redundant, right, let me just be complimentary. So I think entrepreneurs, if they're building an AI company, right, there's a lot of hype today, right? Just remember, company building is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So if you jump in and try to start a company, even though the valuations are crazy, seed rounds are 50 million, 100 million, 150 million, right? Like this won't continue, right? So we are early in the hype cycle. So remember that first and foremost. Second, I would say if you're going to build an enduring company, make sure you have your one-line mission statement and your 4 or 5 values written down really, really clearly. And the reason is it will serve you well in both up times like we are in today, but especially in down times. The next thing I would say is, and probably it was said in different words, in the case of AI, if you remove the hype, make sure your solution is a painkiller. It's not a vitamin. And what I mean by that is just don't wash and say it's AI first, it's AI native, but what does it do for me, right? Like, how is it different? Is it like a 10x multiplier or you use AI? Like every company which comes in now has AI. Public companies report earnings, they're PC companies, server companies. They say every computer will have AI, they remain unnamed, but you guys read the same news I do. The other 2 or 3 things I would say is, even though, yes, AI can replace humans, but if you're building a company, companies are built by people. So make sure you surround yourself with excellence. This is not an individual play. This is a team sport. And then focus, because startups don't die of indigestion. They don't die of starvation, they die of indigestion. So pick one thing and become the king or queen of that hill rather than jack of all trades. And that's the danger with this technology. The applications are so many. Pick one and go deep, build trenches, and create something which is enduring. So I think that's what I would say. Besides, I completely agree with the spaces that have been talked about. Maybe there are more that you guys know, but I think those would me, having been an investor for over 20 years personally, those are the kinds of things I've seen. Every time a new technology comes in, people get obsessed with technology. But technologies come and go, guys, right? Like it's all about building a sustainable business. So keep that in mind as rules of the road as you try to build the next wave of companies, which are AI native, or at the end, this is an ingredient technology, as was said, right? Like, so keep that in mind.
Thank you. Super insightful. Does anyone have any comments, questions about this particular topic? Or we can move to the next one. What are the challenges that investors face today in today's AI market? Like you, kind of to what you were saying, that there's a lot of noise happening and everyone is pitching AI. What are the challenges that you see today that are different from what it was last year?
Yeah, I think like just valuations are out of whack, right? Like basically seed rounds, as I was joking, are no longer 4 or 5 million, right? Like there's a race. Is my seed round 25? Is it 50? Is it 100, right? Like so, but I'm saying we're all part of it. It's just the reality of a cycle, if you will. I think there's going to be, again, this category is going to be overfunded. So we're going to see a lot of Me Too companies. And the challenge with that is, again, there'll be a war on talent. Again, people's expectations will get out of whack on the next round. So just be mindful, right? Like basically have some muscle memory. We saw that in 2020, 2021. Before that, we saw it in crypto. And it's the next tulip that always comes, right? So I think that's the biggest challenge, not only VCs, but entrepreneurs are going to face, right? Like this weather is not going to continue. The world has like seasons. So right now it's great times, but at some point you have to generate revenue, and revenue is not enough. You have to generate profits. You would trade on earnings, right? So just keep that in mind. But hey, we're all humans, so we are part of it. We're not AI, because the AI would say, don't do this.
Lots of challenges. I think one, as Navin said, from a valuation standpoint, we found kind of a tale of two cities. One is if there's any data, whether it's developer data or revenue data, there is this massive shift in valuation, right, because of the supply demand. When there's no data, the valuations that we've seen have been relatively modest, hasn't changed all that much, but the landscape is very competitive, so it's very hard to pick. I think the way that we've thought about application investing, especially in crowded, noisy markets, we focus more on how the founders may have the ability to pivot, right? More so than before. In the infrastructure level and space, I think we do a lot of work. We look at, let's pick a topic, and we look at all the possible customers and their demands are, and we do a really thorough thesis around that. But then we're always asking, what happens when, Microsoft or Google or Amazon or whoever decides to build a tool here? What happens when some of this infrastructure evolves in 6 months? Like, how do we think about that risk, which is harder to predict? And I think the last part is some of the future financing risk, right? I do think there's much less leeway in terms of your performance. If we're investing at the pre-revenue stage, which is mostly what we do, and we try to get to a 75% quote unquote graduation rate, how do we make sure these companies in the hyper-competitive space get the customers and the talent they need? And so we're investing more in portfolio services to help with that. But the bar is high.
All opportunity, no challenges. Nothing much material to add, so much as to say, I think the element of being able and willing to adapt fast is certainly important. And the model capabilities, orchestration, et cetera, will emerge, is changing really rapidly. And so I think that willingness to not get stuck on one's priors, maybe being willing to throw out what you had done, not from a customer experience perspective, hopefully, although maybe that might be needed too, but certainly maybe from a backend perspective. I think about a number of teams that started maybe pre some of the latest foundation models and were more ML-centric, maybe very supervised learning. And some of those teams, you get sunk cost fallacy. You put a lot of effort into something to make it work, and the reality is you might be well served to throw out and take off the shelf or whatever it is. And so maintaining open-mindedness but sort of opinionated determinism is a tough balance, but a great opportunity.
The challenges from an investor point of view that again, will probably be overlap with everything that's already been said. But we are investors in OpenAI, which is a great thing. But that even the GPT-4 from GPT-3 was significantly superior. One lens we're always trying to understand is, what would GPT-5 already include? And so startups can be building for the future. So not what's available today, but a year, 2 years from now, what other capability might exist that they can build around, on top of, or adjacent to. The other challenge we think of, something Miles mentioned previously, is AI doesn't provide distribution. So if an incumbent or an existing solution provider has maybe older technology but already have distribution, there is a chance that this current generation of large language models actually gives them the advantage to adopt a new technology quicker and continue with their distribution advantage. And so a young startup has to start, with a more agile team. They can do the technology soon, but the distribution will still be slow. So really thinking about why they'll be able to win mindshare is as important. And then, even just the implementation of large language models, whether it's, building your own models from scratch, it's fine tuning, it's prompt engineering, et cetera. But how well is this solution performing? So, there's obviously the experience part that was spoken beyond before, but the quality of the model, reliability of the model, even just evaluating the correctness of the model is non-trivial. So how are teams thinking about that, both for today and, 2 to 3 years down the line becomes more important. So, I think in summary, it'll be like, yes, teams that can move quickly, and everybody has said that, but that is important to try to suss out right at the beginning, which is not easy. So that's another challenge for investors.
Thank you. I mean, investing in OpenAI must be, that privilege of the next trillion dollar company. Do you guys think that they will end up cannibalizing the whole market? Is it like a common question? Is like, is there something that OpenAI is not going to do that other startups can do, or eventually they will end up taking the whole market? Like now they're taking plugins and they're kind of like, trying to expand in things that other startups were doing and they seem very promising. But if OpenAI is doing it, it's going to be really hard for any other startup to compete.
I agree with you. I think they have an advantage because they were early movers. They see the use cases, how people are using the APIs or the chat GPT, and then what's the next step, what's the next action. Their partnership with Microsoft, in all of Microsoft 365, lots of advantages. So they get to decide what they want to pick and choose. But I'm not on the board, so I will refer that question to Sam on the future generation, like what will they be building. But it's definitely exciting to be on the the front rows and being able to visualize this wave.
Thank you. Yeah, of course.
Go ahead.
So we're not as close to OpenAI as Khosla is for sure. But I'm very grateful first of all, because we try to invest in generative technologies back in 2017, 2016, and it was just very, very hard. And OpenAI has enabled very capital constrained startups to build with these amazing off-the-shelf models for no cost, almost no cost, right? So that's like fantastic to see. And for the first time, my parents are calling me and asking me, have you seen ChatGPT? So I think the democratization of using AI by people who have no idea how to spell AI, has come to us. I'm very, very grateful for that. That being said, I do think the market share of OpenAI compared to even 2 years ago has decreased because of all the competitors in the space and also the competitive pressures. And I think that's a wonderful thing, right? One of our biggest risks that we wrote in our memo is when we invested in kind of LLM companies 2 years ago was like, how much are we going to rely on OpenAI? And today, that risk probably went from 70% to 10%. I do think every single hyperscaler is going to have its own research arm, OpenAI being one example of that, and others being others, and others might partner with startups. But I think as an ecosystem, the opportunities at the startup front actually increases because of all the aspects of serving a customer that's going to love the product that the startup is providing because that's uniquely suited for that customer. So opportunities are increasing, in my opinion. The market share for each one of these companies each one of these foundation model providers is decreasing, and I think that's a good thing.
And you invested in Jasper, aren't you? So you have more visibility of that. And OpenAI being an elephant, if they move in the right way, I mean, even though Jasper's business is based on the fact that OpenAI exists, if OpenAI decides to do what Jasper does, then isn't that like a topic that you guys discuss?
Oh yes, every single day I get asked that question. But I think, like I said, 2 years ago, that was the biggest risk because Jasper was built entirely on top of OpenAI. Fast forward, Jasper has built their own LLM ops that switches models, providers, and has some of their own models. So that risk has gone down quite a bit. The risk with Jasper is not so much OpenAI, but I think Jasper's ability to go from an SMB strategy with very, very good marketing execution to a enterprise strategy with all the security features, all the integrations, and the shift of the internal culture and talent pool to focus there, right? It's a massive company that is going from a bottom of the market kind of focus to an enterprise focus.
Do
Navin?
you have any perspective, or should I? Yeah, so I think to me, it's not just about OpenAI. Having been part of a given lack of hair and a lot of white hair. Having seen the other movements, whether it was like Windows, whether it was cloud, both as an operator, entrepreneur, and as a VC, or the iPhone moment, right? When these platforms are emerging, it's better to embrace them rather than fight them and figure out where they start and where they finish. And if you're just going to be an ingredient technology trying to build value on top of an OpenAI or Google platform or Amazon, they're going to eventually add it, right? Like, I don't know how many people saw or like were around when Netscape came out or when they were like TCP IP stacks. Windows just kept building up. But Windows software industry is like worldwide, right? Like $500 billion. Microsoft is a fraction of it. So just because a platform is going to be a dominant provider, they're not going to do everything, right? So for example, you asked about Jasper, right? Like you're selling to the marketeer, you're selling to the salesperson, even the channel is different, right? So essentially, if you look at big companies in the client server era, right? Like Microsoft was there, but there was Oracle, SAP. In that generation, there were hundreds of companies from billion to 10 billion in market cap. Then came out the cloud, but there's a few thousand SaaS companies with over $100 million in revenue and Salesforce. Why doesn't Amazon do it, right? AWS is a completely different product, right? Like one is offering IT as a service, storage as a service, networking as a service. The other is providing sales software. So I think that's what you have to think, that if this ingredient technology will come from platforms, like figure out that you're not on a roadmap and not a feature on that, but figure out domains, figure out problems where, and one of our companies, HashiCorp, is a good example. I don't know how many people are familiar with that. In a multi-cloud world, like they figured out a way to build a massive company. So figure out where will these people, whereas there was a lot of cost monitoring companies, this monitoring, that monitoring, like Amazon just subsumed them. So be careful, right? Like, but don't fight these people, just embrace it. Go solve other problems they're not solving. They will keep each other busy, competing with each other. So why do you want to add yourself to that mix? These companies have too much cash flow, right? Hundreds of billions of dollars of cash flow they generate to spend on these kinds of projects. Like focus something that they don't even have a distribution channel on. Because as was said, I agree, that's one of the most important things. And they need to focus too, because market shares can shift like this. Because consumers, right, like where ChatGPT is being adopted, now Google stuff has come out, are fickle, right? Like you provide a better solution, you can switch them. So I think like I'm like very, very hopeful, like jokes apart on what I was mentioning. I think like trillions of dollars of enterprise value is going to get created. How? I think the answers are on that side. We can tell you as VCs what probably didn't work, but what's going to work. It's a brave new world. Like it's going to get figured out. It's going to get figured out.
Thank you. Miles, does anyone have a question in the audience? Yep.
I think I can just project it. Hi, my name's Eric. So you touched on wedges for companies building an AI to sort of like get their foot in the door, but I'm curious, how do you think about building and capturing durable competitive advantages over time?
He was asking, there's wedges that you could use to land as a challenger, as a startup, but how do you think about building enduring competitive advantage over time? I do think there are a lot of what I jokingly call high fructose corn syrup calories available, where you added AI to something and you feel good because actually it might be the first time someone's seen that experience. And you're like, oh my God, I've got 100,000 users. And it is amazing to get 100,000 users, but not enduring. And so I do think that's really important. I think about a few things. I think one is, where are you able to actually, first of all, there might be new terrain to go work on, new markets that were previously inaccessible or poorly served. And I think that's an exciting area to be in. I think it can really look like previously services-oriented companies that can now end up looking like software companies. I think going into legal, where previously it needed so many humans involved that any automation was 10% improvement, 20% improvement. No one's going to take the risk on some new challenger for that level of improvement in terms of cost maybe that you could offer or whatever. But if it's 50% cheaper, 60% cheaper with all the technology, I think services markets could become accessible and look more like software companies. So I think going into new terrain is a great place to be. I think another is if you have a structural, and these could tie, but you have a structurally different business model, and an incumbent faces a true innovator's dilemma to reacting to that, and will probably push off that pain longer than they should, which gives you the window to run. You could look at the transition from on-prem license-based software to software as a service as that. And that happened in Siebel to Salesforce and PeopleSoft and a whole bunch of others got a window to run. I think another to think about is, and again, this is giving you a window for competitors there that will endure for longer than 6 months. Another one would be if the product experience is sort of radically different somehow. That's hard. I haven't seen as many examples yet of those. We might not have seen them yet, I'd argue, because we're still early in that the product experience needs to compensate for the sort of failures, the hallucinations of the models, right? If you have talked to Nat about Copilot, like part of the reason it's architected as a Copilot, which is what everyone's drawing the inspiration from right now, is because how do you make a product experience when the model's not right that often, right? How do you handle its inadequacies? You end up with a Copilot, you still need, think about it like in a car, you need lane assist. It's like I gave you lane assist. Okay, that's interesting, but you're still sitting there in the car. And what happens if you take as a premise that it'll be really good, it'll just work? What could you then do from a product experience that will maybe be disruptive of business model and very different? I think we might end up saying Copilots were like, the MVP, the HTML5 versions of apps or something. I don't know, it's a bad analogy, but be not the end state. It'll look more like a cockpit. You almost build more for the manager than you will for the end user potentially. And that'll be totally different, and that'll mess with a lot of product surface area that's already out there. Maybe you start small right now because it kind of sucks and it only works in certain areas, but that's classical disruption. It is kind of shitty, only in certain parts, cheaper, but for the people who need that and couldn't afford the other or wouldn't do the other, it's magical. And so those are some of the ways I'm thinking as I meet teams about not just the early calories, but what theories, hypotheses could we have about kind of enduring advantage or big windows of advantage that are hard to pivot on.
This is going to be tactical, not cerebral. I know people like cerebral VCs. But I think a couple things we advise our companies to think about is assume you have a customer. How do you keep this customer for 3 years, right? Like there's lots of ways to do that. You could have a 3-year contract, if you can make that happen. You could build integrations. You could have some element of customization. You could, make sure that every single user of the product is incredibly happy with a high NPS scores. There's multiple ways to go about having that as your goal. And that gives you the time to figure out what is the longer term kind of advantage, even if you don't have one to start. That's one thing. The second is from a productivity standpoint, one of our founders asked his employees, if we assume that we're going to all use the productivity tools that are AI driven, what is your role to every single employee? Because that also done right will buy the company more time and resources in a very, very capital and resource constrained environment. And that's a huge advantage.
I can give you a couple of specific examples of companies in the portfolio to maybe give you some inspiration or some ideas. But I previously suggested on in the application domain, for example, you can automate a job completely. which was not previously done because the technology had not advanced. So for example, one of my portfolio companies is PolyAI, which is a voice-based customer support. So for a narrower class of problems, it doesn't, it's not just like, figures out how to give a contact center agent more information or their manager more, details on their performance. It actually just automates the call completely end to end. So it changes the experience so dramatically that it's going to be harder for anybody else to catch up if you continue to do well and continue to gain market share. The other end on changing the workflow, for example, we are investors in a company called DevRev, which is Dheeraj's company. Dheeraj just previously, took Nutanix public. He's trying to say, okay, now in the world where code can be generated automatically, a bigger challenge for companies is, are they building the right thing? And traditionally in enterprises, the customer feedback or data that's recorded in Salesforce is very siloed with what's happening in Jira tickets. There isn't an automatic flow, and that's the workflow he's building. Can I automatically take insights from like a Salesforce or whatever engine he's building and figure out like what should be my developer roadmap created, prioritized in a fashion that will make the most impact? And that workflow is so dramatically changing that again, it'll be hard for an incumbent to catch up. So really thinking more drastically becomes more important. Obviously, at the end of the day, the problem you're solving has to be big, meaty enough, and can be a large market. And I can keep going on and on, but those are some of the examples I wanted to share.
Thank you.
I think there's more questions in the audience.
Of AI. Most of the time, the tech is moving so fast that the information that we have available is largely just available on GitHub or like a white paper done by some researcher. So, and when we face hurdles, a week later, somebody's published a white paper, it could be around low rank adaptation or something like that. So given that the tech is moving so fast, how do you guys think about at what level as an investor you need to understand the tech? And not just that, but also build conviction around business models that we haven't really seen. And when you invest big money at high valuations, I just want to understand how you guys actually think about those things versus just classic enterprise software. Somebody's trying to build a better CRM, and maybe you guys don't invest in those things, but you understand what I'm trying to say. So personally, for each of you, like how are you thinking about at what level you need to understand the tech and how you want to think about business models that haven't been seen yet and build enough conviction that you're okay with $150 million pre-revenue?
Sure. So I think the way I would start the answer is, at least from my perspective, like VCs are not running companies. They're not technologists. You're betting on people, right? So if you guys are developers, right, like everybody believes in the agile software development strategy, I think you need to bet on agile entrepreneurs who can move not on monthly cycles, weekly cycles, daily or hourly cycles, right? They have this DNA of nimbleness, right? And they need to be able to get to the end destination. Like your GPS helps you, right? You don't know where you're going to get hit, where there'll be a road traffic, but that's the way they think. So it comes down to the quality at the stage all of us invest. It comes down to the team, like you are backing, right? At the end, if a VC thinks they know more than the entrepreneur, either the VC is full of shit or the entrepreneur is the wrong entrepreneur, because don't invest in them. You know more than them, really? Or, right, like they don't know it, just don't invest. Wrong model, right? Like so I think that's one. The second thing on valuations is, I think I would say this table, all of us, like have discipline. And yes, valuations, if you use the word AI, I think all of us can figure out what is really being used or not used. And depending upon the risk you are taking, you give the appropriate valuation, right? I don't think any of us pre-product companies are getting done like just because they use AI at 100, 200 posts if people are just starting. Okay, it might be 2x of some other market if they really are solving a real problem, right? And to your question and comment about boring CRM market, right? Like, actually, I would back it. The reason is Salesforce is a 25-year-old company. And I think probably you mentioned, right, like Miles, I think that's how on the wedge, I didn't answer that. People have to think, don't do small, right? Like simple, right? Like think big, right? All these companies, yeah, they can incorporate the ingredient technology, but up the user experience so that it's not just a feature. Think out of the box. If you were building Salesforce today, reimagine. Don't say, hey, I am Salesforce which uses AI. No. Think different, right? Like what can you do, right? That's what one of our company outreach did, right? Basically, boring space, you'll automate salesperson. There was no AI 7, 8 years back. The company just keeps growing. And yeah, today AI comes, they can include it. But they do the whole workflow automation, what a salesperson is doing versus CRM. Simplistically, is still a contact management system. You can go run reports and other things. It doesn't let me do my job better, right? So I think out of the box, and it's doable, right? But the answers are unknown. I think the onus is more on the other side to be able to meander and figure it out as the world changes. Right? The VCs are there to help and guide, but you guys know 100x more of the domain you're focused on.
I think those are just, if you're trying to do something new in some way, it's a different business model. Like that's, I don't think we are excited for the theory and almost what we try and have as initiatives to prove that out over time, but doesn't need to be proven or definitively knowable today. And I think can you make a great decision? But then there's together as a team, and the way we invest is to really deeply partner. We each only make 1 or 2 investments a year. And in some sense, therefore, we really think about it as not making a bet. Hey, what's the distribution of odds? Did we make the right call as a bet? But rather think about it as a commitment. And that commitment is to make that decision great, not just make the great decision. And so to have the theory and then to work like hell and keep learning, trying to keep figuring out to make whatever technology seemed like it wasn't quite working, work as much as possible. Whatever business model felt like a little iffy, to be as good as possible. And that's the commitment we go on when we leap.
Yeah, very rarely will an investor have more information, knowledge, or access to customers than the entrepreneurs themselves. But having said that, we try, right? We try to keep up with what's happening, and the landscape of AI, for example, is changing so rapidly that it's hard for even researchers in AI to keep up. So it's obviously even harder for us, but we try, because if you're investing in a company, you at least want to have a strong intuition, a strong thesis on, hey, this is what's going to play out, and this is why this helps either the product experience or the distribution or the end, opening up a new market or a new demographic. So having that intuition of what is the enabling, pieces of technology or the pieces of differentiation here becomes very important. And then try to identify how should we think about the risk retirement order. Because on day one, you will not be able to attack all the risks that you need to retire in order to build this company. But prioritizing that, I think, is the biggest game. And getting that right can lead to a very large outcome.
So I studied computer science at Berkeley, and I'm really bad at computer science, so now that's why I'm a VC. So to your question around reading research papers, we try. We use a nifty little tool called ChatGPT to tell us what's important. But we don't make investment decisions based on that. I think it's just for us to educate ourselves. The way that we do make investment decisions is, as Navin pointed out, I think our valuation has been fairly consistent. The median valuation for the last 8 years has been pretty consistent. There's obviously outliers, but by and large, pre-revenue companies are not commanding huge valuations, despite what you're reading in the news. I think the second is that we spend as much time, if not more time, diligencing the founders more than the market. And you can see the way that we structure some of these questions. It's all around the people. What is their appetite for, what are their capabilities from a technical standpoint? What is their ability to iterate given a market and a product, and how quickly can they sell and translate that to a customer? What are the reasons for their ambition and persistence? And by the way, we're not looking for perfect people. We're just trying to understand what people are good at collectively as a team and where they need help, so we can fill in some of that. So we spend a lot of time on the individuals, even more so than markets.
One point of difference there, I mean, I don't mind sharing this, but we were, you said like pre-revenue or early revenue companies can command that valuation. Depends, right? For example, we invested recently in Replit's latest round. In terms of revenue, it's still very, very early, but the market it's creating is like 25 million developers on that platform. Like, oh boy, like that is so exciting. So it's a new demographic. We think the next billion developers are going to get, learn or become more productive at coding because of this platform, and that we think can be huge. And so yes, we went into the valuation they could get.
Yeah, I think I actually think differently, right? Like as an early stage investor, we're not in the 10x business, right? Can you make 1000x your money in the exit horizon of a VC? That makes you a great investor, right? And in these large markets, if you start at $1 billion, 1000x, $1 trillion, sure, it'll take 30 years. VC funds end in 10 years. I can show you the math. You start with $100 million valuation, 1000x, 10 billion. How many companies 1 year after the IPO in a normal market are worth $10 billion? So 10x, right, like is playing like in middle school. If you have to play in the NBA, the bar is very high. And yes, I'm not saying don't. There is a certain point after which just the calculus breaks as an early stage investor, because there's so much risk. It's not just about like you have to do it risk adjusted, and that's what the founders forget and VCs forget. Everything looks big. It's easy to invest dollars. It's very hard to get them back. Very hard for everybody, right? Like on theory, we can paint anything as humans. So I think that's why I would say, I would be cautious. There's a lot of optimism and I believe in it, but you need a balance, right? Like if your foundation of building a 50-story building, 100-story building is wrong, right? You know the tower which tilted. So don't build companies that way. Build them the right way. You should have no remorse. And trust me, I've been through many cycles, many, right? And this is the third or fourth one I'm being through, is at the end. Company building is the same, right? Like it's running a marathon, it's not a sprint, and you learn the hard way. It's a very humbling business, entrepreneur, and VC is even more humbling, right? It's just the law of nature. So I think that's what I would say. Great opportunity, but be careful. Don't get carried away too much, right? 10 billion, 20 billion exited companies. Like I wish we all have more of them in the exit horizon of a VC. I haven't seen them.
I know some of you have to get out now. So do you think that it's for one question or we can do it now? You're the CEO. So I'm going to get one question, but okay. I'm going to close with one question, and it's, are there any ethical implications of AI that keep you awake? Especially since you're, powering or fueling the investments of today. Is there anything of the ethical concerns of AI that you feel concerned as well, and that you consider when you're making the investments that you make?
I'm in the camp that, AI is still so early that if we try to create too many boundaries around it, we'll just limit ourselves. Like there is the power of the platform is yet to be seen. So I'm in that camp. Having said that, I do support, Sam working with the Senate, figuring out what the regulatory landscape should be and actually having a say in creating those regulations. Like, yeah, like it's fine, But for early stage startups, I don't think they should over-index on the, I think just figuring out the power, the experience, et cetera, that they can create is so much more important. The companies won't fail because on day one they didn't get the ethics right. Like they will win because they figured out the product market fit for their enabling technology, for the right demographic, et cetera. And at that stage, that's more important. The other angle from AI, and you probably have heard this before, is, currently, like, there are humans doing the task, and humans are innately biased. We can't even measure their level of bias. At least with AI, you can measure how biased this model is, and then take corrective actions. So I feel like I can sleep because I can think of those things, but it's still very early, and it's too early to start creating more boundaries around what AI should do.
I agree on the too early to create boundaries, and the fear mongering, I think, is, I'd just ignore it if I was a founder personally. That said, though, I think that there will be it could be, not right now, but over the coming, several years, decade, significant upheaval insofar as we are, not from fear of what it will do and take over the world, but so far as we are putting intelligence in silico, and what happens when you've digitized intelligence in that way, and you can rent intelligence, and the marginal cost of intelligence and work is really, really low. The reorganizing of society as a consequence of that, the reskilling, could be, if AGI or versions of it get close, like an interesting challenge.
So this is outside of maybe advice for a startup founder, but just from a societal standpoint, people talk about the challenges of social media as one example. There's so much talk about that. But then at the same time, I see, I have a grandfather who's 106, lives in China. He's very lonely. His youngest friend or oldest friend is 70 years old. That's 30 years younger than him. And the only highlight in his day is to spend 4 hours on social media, because it's his only access and outlet to the world, right? And so I think of any of these technologies as a tool, and now an increasingly powerful tool, both on the upside and the downside. And certainly there's a lot of downsides, including everything around the cost of creating fake content is approaching zero. The bias that is inherent in many of these models, it's obvious. And so what are the ways that we can solve for that? There's a lot of startup opportunities. For example, we have a company called Arise, which does model monitoring as an independent solution. We have cybersecurity companies that are identifying when things that feels wrong in a situation, and monitoring some of that. I think that there are organizations outside of the startup ecosystem trying to figure out the boundaries of some of this. But I'm in the camp of let's not stifle innovation, let's encourage it, because as we're making tools more powerful, other people are, and we want to be in the business of creating this innovative tool that is in itself creating more innovation, which I think is doubly powerful.
Yeah, I tend to agree. The only thing I would say is we are asking our founders is to take data privacy in a very serious way, because humans can forget. If you train us on something, it may not be important, but machine is never going to forget. So we are telling people just make sure privacy, but everything else, I agree with what people have said. It's just early days. Go build real companies, but keep privacy in mind, because with machines, right, you don't know how that data can be used.